What if a simple envelope buried at the bottom of your mail pile held the power to slash your VA rating in half, without a single phone call, exam, or explanation? One missing document, one unanswered letter. That's all it takes. For thousands of veterans, what seems like a harmless clerical error has triggered life-altering consequences. Their benefits gone, their status changed, and worst of all, they never saw it coming. This isn't just some one-in-a-million mistake. It's a loophole baked into the system, where silence is treated as consent, and a form lost in the shuffle can decide your financial future. And if you think the VA or IRS will warn you before it happens, think again. They'll just adjust your rating, issue a cold new letter, and move on while you're left picking up the pieces. In this video, we're going to walk you through a shocking real-life case where a misplaced VA form led to an overnight downgrade in disability benefits, and how easily it could happen to you. We'll expose the little-known policies that allow it, the warning signs most vets miss, and what you can do right now to protect yourself before your entire rating is quietly rewritten. Because the reality is, this system doesn't always work in your favor. And the moment you stop paying attention, it takes advantage of that. So stay with me until the end, because this story might just save your benefits. And once you understand how it all unfolded, you'll never look at a VA envelope the same way again. His name was Marcus, and until the letter showed up, life had finally started to feel steady. After years of back and forth with the VA, he had secured a 70% disability rating, enough to cover his rent, pay for medication, and give him a little breathing room each month. For Marcus, like so many veterans, that rating wasn't just a number. It was recognition. It was stability. It was peace of mind. But all of that disappeared overnight. It started with something small. A plain white envelope he barely noticed in a stack of mail. No bold lettering. No urgent response required. Just a standard VA return address and a generic subject line. Marcus, exhausted after a week of appointments, left it unopened on the kitchen table. A few days passed, then a week. By the time he remembered to open it, the deadline had already passed. Inside was something the VA calls a routine future exam notice. These are sent when the agency wants to reevaluate your condition, usually to determine if your disability has improved. The notice included a scheduled exam date and a stern warning. Failure to appear could result in a downgrade or cancellation of benefits. Marcus had no idea. He never read it, never confirmed, never showed up. 2 weeks later, a new letter came. This one was different. It used words like reduction, reassessment, and change in benefit amount. His rating had been lowered to 40%. No new evidence submitted. No hearing. No warning beyond the letter he missed. His monthly payment dropped by nearly a third. And just like that, the system had spoken. What made this worse was that Marcus's condition hadn't improved at all. His migraines were still disabling. His knee injury still made walking painful. But in the VA's eyes, missing that appointment meant forfeiting the right to prove it. The policy was clear. No show, no benefit. It didn't matter why. It didn't matter that the letter could have been lost, delayed, or overlooked. To the system, non-response equals compliance. This kind of procedural downgrade isn't rare. It happens more often than most veterans realize, especially to those dealing with chronic mental health conditions, homelessness, or unstable housing. Exactly the people most likely to miss a letter in the first place. The VA's logic? They sent it. You didn't respond. Case closed. Marcus tried to fight it. He called, filed an appeal, asked for a new exam. But the appeal process takes months, sometimes years. In the meantime, he had to live with less. He cut back on groceries, skipped prescriptions, even borrowed money to make rent. The system he once trusted to support him had turned its back over a single misnotice. And here's the part that really stings. There was no bad intent. Marcus wasn't trying to cheat the system. He just didn't see the letter in time. But in a bureaucracy this large, that doesn't matter. What matters is the paperwork, the timeline, the appearance of non-compliance. And unless you know how to push back, quickly, strategically, and with the right forms in hand, you can lose months of support before anyone even looks at your case again. Marcus's story isn't an outlier. It's a warning, because the VA doesn't need your permission to reduce your rating. All they need is your silence. And unless you're checking every envelope, reading every line, and responding immediately, you might not even know they're watching until it's too late. But Marcus's story was only the beginning, because what happened next revealed something even more alarming. What Marcus didn't realize, what most veterans still don't realize, is that missing a VA exam isn't just a clerical mistake. It triggers a chain reaction behind the scenes, one that can quietly change your entire record before you even know it's happening. See, once you miss that scheduled exam, the VA flags your file. The assumption that your condition may have improved or is no longer disabling. It doesn't matter if you've had worsening symptoms or no change at all. The system runs on protocols, not people. And that's exactly what happened. Within days of missed appointment, Marcus's file was auto-routed for what's called a proposed reduction. This isn't a casual suggestion. It's the VA's formal intent to cut your benefits based on a lack of recent medical confirmation. They don't need updated labs. They don't need testimony from a doctor. They just need a missed check-in. Behind the scenes, a VA rater reviews your existing file, looking for any indication that your condition has gotten better. They're not required to reach out to you directly beyond that initial letter. No follow-up calls, no email reminders, just a mechanical decision tree. If the exam was missed, proceed to reassessment. If no new evidence is received within 60 days, finalize the downgrade. That's where Marcus got caught. He didn't submit anything in response because he didn't even know there was a decision being made. And because no additional documentation arrived in that window, the VA moved forward and finalized a reduction without further notice. Just a letter stating the new percentage, mailed out days after the change had already gone into effect. But it didn't stop there. The downgrade had ripple effects. His eligibility for certain health benefits changed. Co-pays increased. Prescription coverage shrank. He even lost access to a caregiver program he qualified for under the higher rating. The system had quietly reclassified him. And suddenly, services he relied on were out of reach. Worse, the IRS got involved too, because VA compensation can impact your taxes if it crosses certain thresholds or interacts with other forms of income. With Marcus's reduced rating, his financial profile shifted. That year, he ended up owing more in taxes than expected, thanks to adjustments that came directly from his benefits downgrade. Another hit he never saw coming. Marcus tried to explain. He sent letters, called the VA hotline, waited hours on hold, only to be told that the reduction couldn't be reversed without a formal appeal. And here's the kicker. Even though the VA acknowledged the missed letter may have been a factor, they held firm. The policy didn't require them to prove that he knew about the exam, only that they sent notice. That's it. All of this because of one routine form letter that got buried in a pile of junk mail. And the truth is, this story could happen to almost anyone. It's not about fraud or negligence. It's about how easily someone can fall through the cracks when a system treats missed paperwork as a reflection of their health. Veterans dealing with PTSD, memory issues, housing instability, or chronic pain are especially at risk. The very conditions that justify their ratings make them more likely to miss a step and then get punished for it. Marcus eventually got help from a veteran service officer who guided him through a supplemental claim, but it took over a year before his rating was restored. In that time, he faced eviction, missed multiple medications, and lost almost $10,000 in combined benefits and tax credits, all because he missed a letter. And while he was one of the lucky ones who got his rating back, most aren't. Many don't even realize their downgrade was avoidable. They assume it was legitimate. They never push back, and the VA never corrects the record unless you make them. But as damaging as the downgrade was, the real shock came next, when Marcus found out why his file had been flagged in the first place. And that part of the story changes everything. What Marcus uncovered next wasn't just frustrating, it was deeply unsettling. When his advocate finally got access to his records, they discovered that the original reason for his re-exam had nothing to do with his actual condition. It wasn't based on a complaint. It wasn't triggered by a doctor's report. It wasn't even part of a routine schedule. Instead, it stemmed from a random audit tied to a policy change the VA had rolled out months earlier, one that most veterans never even knew existed. Here's how it worked. As part of an internal cleanup, the VA began scanning files that hadn't been reviewed in a while. They weren't looking for fraud. They were looking for potential improvement. A fancy way of saying, if a veteran had held the same rating for several years without a recent check-in, the system flagged them for review. But that review wasn't always manual. Sometimes it was triggered automatically based on algorithms inside the VA's case management system. In Marcus's case, his last CNP exam had been 5 years prior. His files showed no recent hospitalizations, no ER visits, and no new claims. To the algorithm, that meant he might be better. But the truth was far from that. Marcus wasn't doing well. He was coping quietly, like many veterans. He didn't seek help unless absolutely necessary. He wasn't avoiding care. He just wasn't making noise. The VA system didn't ask why. It didn't consider context. It only saw silence and interpreted it as improvement. So, the algorithm flagged his record. A scheduler generated a re-exam notice. A letter was sent, and when Marcus missed the appointment, the rest unfolded like clockwork. But here's where it gets worse. When the advocate requested the audit criteria, the actual reason Marcus's file was selected, they were told it wasn't publicly available. The selection process was internal, confidential, unreviewable. Think about that. A veteran's entire disability rating, their financial lifeline, can be reevaluated based on a formula no one is allowed to see. You can lose thousands of dollars a year because a black box says your case looks stable. It's not based on evidence of recovery. It's based on absence of evidence to the contrary. Even the VA employees Marcus spoke with were hesitant to explain it. Some hinted that the selection tool had been under review. Others admitted off record that too many cases were getting flagged by mistake. But there was no process to undo it once started, unless the veteran appealed. In other words, the burden fell on him to prove he was still disabled, even though he never asked to be reevaluated in the first place. The system assumed progress, and then punished him for not disproving it quickly enough. By now, Marcus had pieced it together. A silent audit, an overlooked letter, a misappointment, and an automatic downgrade. But one question haunted him more than any other. If this could happen so easily to him, how many other veterans were quietly being downgraded without ever knowing why? And the more he asked around, the clearer it became. He wasn't alone, not by a long shot. Veterans across the country were seeing similar things. Unexpected letters, sudden drops in rating, confusing exam requests that came out of nowhere. Many didn't appeal, either because they didn't know how, or because they assumed the decision must have been justified. But Marcus knew better now. The system wasn't just flawed. It was designed to move fast when it reduced benefits, and move slowly, very slowly, when trying to restore them. And what he learned next about how appeals were handled only added insult to injury. Marcus had been blindsided by the downgrade, but he wasn't ready to give up. With his advocate's help, he filed a formal appeal to contest the VA's decision. What he didn't realize, though, was just how uphill that battle would be. Because while the VA has systems in place to reduce benefits swiftly, restoring them is another story entirely. The appeal process was supposed to be straightforward. Submit new evidence, request a hearing, and let a decision review officer reevaluate the case. But in practice, Marcus quickly discovered how slow and opaque it could be. His appeal was marked as in development for weeks. Every time he checked the portal, the status hadn't changed. When he called the VA hotline, the reps were polite, but vague. We're working on it. We can't give a timeline. Please be patient. Behind the scenes, there was no urgency. No one was rushing to fix the downgrade. No one was accountable for the original mistake. And here's what made it worse. Even after Marcus sent in updated medical records and proof of continued symptoms, his claim was stuck. Not because the evidence was weak, but because the system was simply overwhelmed. You see, every year, the VA receives hundreds of thousands of appeals. Some are about missed payments. Others involve disputes over service connection. But a growing number, Marcus found out, are veterans like him, trying to undo damage caused by the VA's own automation. And here's the kicker. Once a rating is reduced, the veteran doesn't just lose monthly income. They can also lose access to other benefits, like health care, travel reimbursement, and caregiver support. So even while Marcus was trying to reverse the downgrade, he had to pay out of pocket for treatments he used to get for free. His life was harder, not because a condition had changed, but because a computer said it had. At one point, his advocate advised him to request a higher level review. That meant taking his appeal to someone with more experience, someone authorized to overrule the previous decision. But that process added months. And even then, there was no guarantee of success. The reviewer could decide to uphold the downgrade or send it back to square one. The longer this dragged on, the more Marcus realized how backwards the system was. If the VA made a mistake, it was on him to fix it. If their algorithm flagged the wrong file, he was the one who paid the price. And while the VA insisted they were veteran-focused, their actions told a different story, one where efficiency came before fairness and cost-saving came before care. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had served his country, fulfilled his duties, and trusted the promises he was given. But now, when he needed that same system to do right by him, it moved like molasses, cold, impersonal, and indifferent. Still, Marcus didn't stop. He kept documenting his symptoms, kept showing up for appointments, kept following every piece of advice from his advocate. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about refusing to let a clerical error define his reality. And just when he thought things couldn't get more tangled, another letter arrived. This one with a new surprise that would push everything into even murkier territory. The new letter came with a cold formality that made Marcus's stomach drop. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a correction. It was something worse, a notice of overpayment. According to the VA, Marcus now owed them thousands of dollars, money he had legally received before the downgrade, but that the system now claimed was an error. He read it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake, but there it was in black and white. He had 30 days to respond or face automatic deductions from his future benefits. At first, Marcus thought this had to be a glitch. Surely, if they were reviewing his appeal, they wouldn't come after him for money at the same time. But after hours on hold with the VA Debt Management Center, it became clear this wasn't a glitch. It was protocol. When the system adjusts a rating downward, it doesn't just lower future payments. It retroactively calculates how much the veteran shouldn't have received under the new rating, and it wants it back. Marcus felt betrayed all over again. He had spent those funds on medications, rent, groceries, basic needs. Now, they were calling it a debt, even though the downgrade hadn't even been finalized on appeal. It was like being penalized for trusting the system in the first place. His advocate explained that this happens more often than people realize. Veterans who are wrongly downgraded can still be hit with overpayment letters. And once the debt is on the books, it doesn't matter whether you're appealing or not. The VA starts collecting. They can withhold portions of your remaining compensation, intercept tax returns, even report the debt to credit agencies if it goes unpaid. Marcus tried to fight it. He filed a waiver request, explaining the hardship this would cause. But the burden of proof was on him. He had to show that repaying the money would create financial hardship. And even then, approval wasn't guaranteed. The VA's decision-makers, often far removed from the veterans they impact, weighed those waivers based on internal criteria, not personal stories. What made it worse was the timing. Because the overpayment wasn't caused by Marcus, it was caused by the system's own missteps. A misplaced form letter, a misfiled update, and a lack of human review had started this chain reaction. Yet now, he was expected to clean up the mess while watching his benefits shrink even further. This part of the process, being billed for money he was entitled to, is what broke something in Marcus. It wasn't just a loss of trust. It was a realization that in the eyes of the system, he was just a number. There was no room for nuance, no recognition that his disability hadn't magically improved overnight, no understanding that the government's left hand didn't seem to know what the right was doing. And here's the part no one tells you. Overpayment letters don't go away quietly. Some veterans give in. They accept the deductions. Others fight tooth and nail, only to spend years in a legal loop that drains their energy and their hope. For Marcus, it was another mountain to climb, at a time when he already felt like he was barely holding on. He started keeping a daily journal, not for therapy, but to track every call, every letter, every promise the VA made and didn't keep. Because at this point, the paperwork had become a battlefield, and to survive it, he had to stay organized, persistent, and louder than the silence he kept getting in return. But just when Marcus thought he'd seen the worst of it, something happened that changed the direction of everything. Not because the VA finally admitted fault, but because someone unexpected stepped in and forced him to take a second look. What happened next wasn't a miracle. It was persistence meeting the right person at the right time. Marcus had nearly given up when his case landed on the desk of a senior VA adjudicator who actually read through his file in detail, not skimmed it, not filtered it through a template, but truly read every form, every submission, every timestamp. And that's when something odd was noticed. The adjudicator found an internal memo buried deep in the digital notes, indicating that the original downgrade wasn't just based on a routine review. It had stemmed from an administrative error tied to Marcus's file being temporarily flagged for incomplete documentation. The problem? That flag was resolved just days later when the missing document arrived and was scanned into the system. But no one ever removed the flag or updated the corresponding case note, which meant every VA raider after that point was reviewing Marcus's record through the lens of an outdated, incomplete profile. It was like judging a book after reading only the first chapter, and then closing it forever. And that flag? It was a trigger that led to the erroneous downgrade. A misstep that should have been caught months ago. But instead, it snowballed. The computer systems didn't talk to each other, and the humans were stretched too thin to question it. So Marcus's entire rating had been built on a flawed assumption. When the adjudicator raised the issue, the VA didn't immediately reverse course. It took additional documentation, supervisor reviews, and more waiting. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of accountability. Someone was finally acknowledging that Marcus hadn't exaggerated his condition, that the downgrade wasn't the result of a new medical review or a change in status. It was simply a case of outdated data guiding a flawed process. The VA's tone shifted. Marcus received a call, not a letter, from a representative who actually sounded human. They apologized, not in legal terms, but sincerely. His rating was restored, retroactive to the date it had been downgraded, and that crushing overpayment debt, erased, officially labeled as an administrative error that should never have happened in the first place. But the emotional damage couldn't be reversed as easily. Marcus had lost sleep, time, and a deep sense of trust that had already been fragile. He'd spent nearly a year fighting to prove he was still disabled, something that, in reality, had never changed. All because of a single misfiled update, a form letter that didn't go where it should have gone, and a system that let automation take the wheel when what it really needed was a human being paying attention. That's the danger few people talk about. It's not always the big, flashy errors that ruin lives. It's the small ones. A checkbox not ticked, a form misrouted, a note left in a file that no one bothers to revisit. These are the cracks where veterans fall through, quietly, invisibly, until someone finally says, "Wait, this doesn't make sense." Marcus's story ended with resolution, but not victory. Because in a system this complex, the fact that things were corrected wasn't a celebration. It was a warning, a reminder that if it happened to him, it could happen to anyone. And unless more people start paying attention, speaking up, and refusing to be silent when something feels off, the next mistake might not be caught in time. But Marcus wasn't done yet, because what he did after that, what he chose to do with the lessons he'd learned, would end up helping more people than he ever imagined. Sometimes, what changes a life isn't a dramatic event. It's a quiet mistake buried in a file that no one bothers to double-check. That's what Marcus learned the hard way. One routine form, misplaced in a sea of paperwork, nearly cost him his entire disability rating and the sense of dignity he'd worked so hard to rebuild after service. And while his story had a resolution, it left behind a trail of questions no veteran should have to ask. How many others are out there silently losing benefits because of the same hidden system flaws? How many are too exhausted to fight back? Marcus's journey was never supposed to become a cautionary tale. He followed the rules, trusted the system, and believed that the VA would act in good faith. But what he discovered was a maze where one wrong turn, especially one made by someone else, can trap you in a cycle of delays, denials, and doubt. And the most unsettling part? The system never notified him. There was no red flag, no alert, no one call and say, "Hey, something doesn't add up here." He had to fight for every answer, and not everyone has the time, energy, or mental bandwidth to do that. That's why stories like this matter, because they shine a light on the quieter failures, those that don't make headlines, but ruin lives slowly and silently. They remind us that vigilance is not optional when dealing with large bureaucracies, and that even one overlooked document can snowball into financial stress, mental strain, and a deep sense of helplessness. But there's a deeper takeaway here too. Marcus didn't stop once his benefits were restored. He turned around and started helping other veterans navigate the same broken maze. He began speaking up in forums, educating others on the most common missteps that lead to sudden downgrades. And more importantly, he made sure people knew that they're not crazy for questioning the process, that it's okay to demand a second look, that you're allowed to push back, even when the letterhead says official. So if you've ever felt like something wasn't right with your rating, or if a sudden change felt too abrupt, trust your instincts. Ask questions, request copies, call again, because in this system, silence often equals consent, and consent can cost you more than just a check. It can cost you your voice. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this video helped you understand the hidden pitfalls veterans face, or if it sparked a thought about your own journey, leave a comment and let us know. Your stories, your questions, your voices, they help others realize they're not alone. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on the bell. We've got more real stories, resources, and breakdowns coming soon, because no veteran should have to walk this road blind. Stay strong, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.